You are listening to the Minivan Movie Club Podcast. Want to see movies for free? You could win a free $25 Fandango gift card by being one of the first 100 subscribers to our YouTube channel. All you have to do to be entered in this giveaway is go to our Minivan Movie Club channel on YouTube, subscribe to the page, and you're entered to win. Enter today and have a chance to see a movie on the Mini. Enjoy the show.
Yo, yo, yo. Welcome back to the Minivan Movie Club. My name's Brett Gray, hanging out with the bearded boy wonder, Nick Wiggum.
What's up, guys?
Nick, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. We had a Marvel week, so
it was a marvelous one.
It's always good when you got a Marvel movie on deck to talk about. You watched one in theaters. I've enjoyed Phase 5 so far. It started out a little bit rocky, but
it's kind of like our podcast. You know, last week we posted our Iron Man episode, and when I say posted, we posted on Spotify. We've had just a tremendous amount of technology gremlins. Me, as the producer, has been learning a lot about live videos and YouTube encoders, and I still haven't figured out how to get it posted on YouTube. For whatever reason, the file is not working, and that is kind of the way that it is. But we talked about in the episode, Tony Stark said sometimes you've got to run before you can walk, and we're trying to do that here in the minivan. We're trying to just get going and publish some things. So today what we wanted to do is talk a little bit about Guardians of the Galaxy 3, rehash a little bit of the MCU, and really just have a lot of fun because it was a really fun movie.
Oh, yes. It's the perfect movie to kick off summer. We talked last week about what our expectations were going into this movie, and then the week before that we talked about blockbusters and what they meant to us, and this was the perfect example of what a summer blockbuster should be. It's got a lot of action, sweet visuals, lots of laughs, and it's got heart.
Yep. So before we jump into the movie, I think it's good to we've had 10 episodes now here in the Minivan Movie Club. If you haven't checked them out yet, you can find all of them on YouTube, on our channel, or on our Spotify page. So be sure to check out each one of those episodes, and you can kind of see the story that we've been crafting. But I think it's a good time for us to think about like our movie grading criteria and just have a very quick discussion about what matters to you, because we've seen some really good movies on the channel. We've also seen, in my opinion, what are some pretty just crap movies. And this movie felt like a good movie. But without giving anything away too soon, again, we don't believe in spoilers on minivans, so if you haven't seen the movie Guardians of the Galaxy, this is probably not the time to watch this episode. Go ahead, watch it, and come back. But when you think about what makes a movie good and like kind of the grading criteria, what makes a movie fantastic? Pun intended. What makes a movie, really, really good, and how do you quantify some of these like qualitative elements? We've talked in the past about story, making sure it's got a really good and unique story. We've talked about pacing and directorial vision, production value, these good moments, this timelessness, the rewatchability. After these first 10 episodes, reviewing movies and spending some time in them, have you learned anything about your kind of criteria and what you think about when you're watching these movies?
Well, you talk a lot about being like an eternal optimist. I do find that in general, I enjoy most movies I watch to some degree. Obviously, it makes me distinguish a little bit more about what I consider to be a good quality film versus just a fun movie that you can enjoy, because it's like you said, there are multiple pieces. How they put those pieces together, how they make all those different criteria work together can make a movie kind of an all-timer as far as a 10 out of 10, just an amazing movie, versus I really had fun with that movie like you did with Murder Mystery 2, where it was like you spoke so colorfully about the movie and how much you enjoyed it, and then you gave your score, and I was like a little shocked, but it makes sense because while it did what it was doing well for you, it's still
wasn't a great movie,
skill of like, what does this cinematic piece mean? It's not up there, but it's still rewatchable. It's still, you can still have fun with it. One of my favorite movies of all time is Nacho Libre. It's not a good movie at all, but I love it. I've seen it hundreds of times. I hate to admit that, but yes, I have. And so it doesn't have to be an all-timer for you to like it.
Yep. No, I think something that I've really been learning since we started the show is how difficult it would be to work in the media space and still enjoy movies, because we're trying to make sure that each week we create valuable information for you or a new discussion that isn't something you're going to see elsewhere. Nick and I were just talking before we started recording that, we watch New Rock Stars, we watch Screen Crush, we watch Heavy Spoilers, The Deep Dive. Those are great YouTube channels, and you should watch them. You should enjoy them. But how do we make sure that the conversations we're having here are different and unique? And it's kind of that weird thing where we could pretty naturally have a discussion that just happens to be very similar to their discussion. So part of me doesn't want to watch those videos before we have a discussion. But then there's another part of me that's like the fan. I want to watch it because I want to know what theories did they pick up on, while also making sure that that stuff doesn't become the inspiration for my own thoughts and my ideas. Yeah. So there's a really excellent video on The Deep Dive where Eric Voss talks about his process and the way that they at New Rockstars stitch together all these trailers and content materials to start to break down and anticipate what the movie is, so that the moment the movie drops, they can very quickly respond to, all right, this is what the movie's going to be about. That is kind of a scary thing, because you're saying we don't enjoy the movies as much because we have to anticipate so much. Me, on the other end, I still want to enjoy the movies. I want to have a discussion, and I hope that those that are listening, those that are watching, they want to join in that discussion as well. But I don't ever want to get to the place where we're doing the same thing or just regurgitating other people's information. The Minivan Movie Club is a place for us to have a discussion just like you would when we're driving home from the movie.
Yeah, and we talked about one of the key things for us going forward. We did our first 10 episodes is going to be passion. Are we passionate about this?
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to just crank out movies because we scheduled it and or because we need some sort of content for that week. We never want this to be not fun. If it's not fun for us, it's not going to be fun for you guys, and it's not going to be quality. I think the biggest example of that is going to be The Last Kingdom, Seven Kings Must Die. While overall it's not going to be the biggest movie in the world, it's one of our most viewed videos, I think, because we were passionate about it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that was just a series that we both loved. We came into it with so much heart, and juxtaposed against something like Mario. Mario was a huge commercial success, and a surprise, too. Yeah. I was not excited about Mario, and since having seen it, I have found myself still thinking about how much fun I had. Fun is infectious. Emotions are infectious. Movies have this transcendent ability to walk across time, space, generations, everything, and connect people. So when I watch The Last Kingdom or Mario, totally different movies, totally different shows, content, everything is, there's not much that's similar other than the fact that I watched them on a screen. Yeah. There's just not much similar, but there's still a lot to talk about thematically, fun, and that's what we want to do each week on the Minivan Movie Club, is just welcome you into the van, have a fun conversation, and just talk amongst friends.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Mario, my son on his way to his soccer game this Saturday was singing Peaches at the top of his lungs. He will not let anybody else sing along. He tells us, stop it. He's doing the singing, so... He's all into it. He loves Peaches. That's his jam.
Yes, Peaches is a vibe for my kids. I've got videos of my daughter, my third daughter. Just Peaches. She loves it.
You got a third daughter?
My third kid. My third kid. She's number 3. She's the third. So yeah. But let's talk a little bit about Guardians of the Galaxy, Volume 3. We had the chance to see it on opening night.
Yep.
What were your initial reactions to the film?
Satisfaction. I was so satisfied.
You were satisfied.
I was satisfied.
You always left me
satisfied.
More.
Yes, I was satisfied and wanting more. No, I loved it. I thought it was exactly the opposite of my problems with Ant-Man, which was if this movie felt like a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, it was telling a Guardians of the Galaxy story, and it was a conclusion to a trilogy that felt that it delivered on everything I needed to see.
Mm-hmm. So I think I said it in our little short video. In a word, the way I would describe this movie in a single word was glorious. I really thought this was a glorious movie because it's what all comic book movies should really strive to be, because it's creative, it's unique, and it's really thought-provoking on some pretty deep topics, but it's still really fun. It doesn't feel like it's trying to beat you over the head with some, hidden agenda or big dark topic, but it still also is reminding you of all the characters that I met all the way in Guardians 1. Yeah. Because, last week we talked about Iron Man, and Iron Man is really the beginning of the Avengers story. So without Iron Man, you cannot get to the Avengers. But without Guardians, I think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 is really the first step towards Thanos, which is Infinity War and Endgame. Because when you look back to those movies, when it did well, no one knew who Star-Lord was. I mean, it was a reboot of a comic from 2008, so it really didn't even have like the old nostalgia of other characters. But James Gunn and his very unique style of writing, of delivery, it was just so infectious that when you saw Guardians of the Galaxy 1, you knew, that was a comic book movie. Yeah. Number 2, that was a comic book movie. This one just felt cover to cover like it was an inspired movie. So I just want to say bravo to the MCU for allowing them to make this movie, but also bravo to James Gunn for making such an inspired, well-done movie.
As Marvel fans, you will be missed, James Gunn.
So I think that there's a couple of questions to ask leading it. Without, again, we're not the channel that's going to go into the whole details of the movie. If you're looking for Easter eggs and spoilers and all that stuff, go watch those other channels that we've already mentioned.
There's a ton of channels.
There are so many. I've watched
hours and hours. Of
between the two
content.
of us, I probably watched 6 hours of stuff.
Yeah, I'm close to that.
I'm at 6 hours of just all kinds of Easter eggs. I'm like, I didn't even notice that. That was really good.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. So, what were some of your highlight moments from the movie?
For me, I think obviously just seeing the crew back together, because it's been 6 years since Guardians 1, and Endgame is 3 years ago.
Over 4 years ago.
So it's been a while since we've had this crew. We did get the holiday special, which was totally fun. But just seeing them together, their banter is some of the best because they all play off of each other so well. Even in these serious moments, they don't cut off the seriousness with levity, but they show you the humor inside of how sad a lot of their stories are, because they're all dealing with different things. And the way that they all kind of take their good and bad and just mold together to form a team is just so fun to me.
Yeah, I think one of the first real positive things people started talking about the MCU, and it was in its early days, was seeing characters grow over a series of several movies, and as opposed to having to watch the arc of one character through a specific conflict or specific movie. Looking at the Guardians, especially in Volume 3, most team-up movies, you only get it's the Guardians of the Galaxy, but this is Peter's movie, so Peter's going to get the big moment, and everyone else is kind of going to be just side characters aiding that narrative. I think Guardians of the Galaxy 3 makes sure that every person gets their moment, everyone gets their growth, and it's very thoughtful. It's not just, hey, we want to tell a Captain America story, but we also want to have all these other MCU characters, so let's push them into the movie. Hey, we're telling a Thor story. We need cameos from other people. Let's just push them into a movie. Where, Ant-Man 3, I think Thor Love and Thunder felt a little bit more like that. This just felt like a Guardians movie, and I was particularly struck by the performances from Nebula. I think that Nebula, through the first Guardians movie, the second Guardians, and then obviously with Endgame and Infinity War, she's a totally different person. And this movie highlighted that. It's easy to forget that, all these Guardians, they were dusted. Nebula and Rocket were the only ones that weren't dusted. They had 5 years to spend time. And so that's why I think you see so much more heart from Nebula, this cybernetic assassin. And I think that's really cool.
Oh yeah, and she was always a character I kind of liked because she was
Karen
so
Gillan's
angry.
cool.
So I saw in an interview she was talking about the inspiration for her character, and she said that the only instruction that James Gunn gave her after her first scene trying to film the character was to play it like Marilyn Monroe mixed with Clint Eastwood. So if you watch the way that she talks and like her cadence and delivery, she's talking like Clint Eastwood does in westerns, mixed with like Marilyn Monroe, and it's like how she walks around, but it's perfect. It like makes the character like so unique and fun and perfect. And that's another thing is they have all these different characters and they're all unique in their own ways. Like the style, the way they look, the way they act, but it like just marries so well together.
Something that I can't remember where I saw it, but this is not an original thought. Somebody on a different channel said one of the reasons that all the Guardians movies work so well is because they believe in the acting. So Star-Lord is kind of this, very kind of into himself, egotistical dude. And then Drax is a guy that doesn't get metaphors. And then Rocket's a raccoon. You have Groot, who throughout the series of the movies is different versions of himself, but he still says, I am Groot. It would be really easy to be in this movie and not take it seriously, but because everybody is 100% in the moment, in the acting, it plays off so much better as a composition because everybody is believing to it. So instead of it looking like you have all this very different colored patches in this quilt, you're able to step back and it starts looking very homogenous. So I think this movie is really good. What did you think of The High Evolutionary?
I loved him.
Oh, yeah?
I think that he is a top 5 MCU villain.
Okay, that leads me to my next question.
I think that Chukwudi Iwaji is his name. I think that he did exactly what you need out of a villain, which is he didn't sell it, he didn't phone it in, he completely gave into what the character was, the extremeness of that character, and it was just so fun to watch on screen. It translates. He did not hold back, and you can see that. I think that he was I'm glad that they went with him. There were some talks of maybe being some other villains, but I'm glad that he was what they ended up with.
I think this is a fantastic villain, and I want to give. There's been a lot of bad credit given to the MCU, and they've earned a lot of it. But the villains in this last phase have been fantastic.
Yeah,
I think we've gotten a lot of good villains post Endgame. Really, I think the villains they've really stepped it up, and not anyone near the level of like a Thanos. But I mean, you look at some of these villains, they're really good. I got this tweet online from @RichardL.Newby. You can see, Richard, I got your tweet right here. It said, I love that James Gunn chose Chidwick Iwuji for The High Evolutionary. One of those great cases of not just picking a well-known marquee name because of social media popularity, but a thespian who's played the stage for decades and absolutely nails this performance. I love The High Evolutionary in Guardians of the Galaxy. This is what struck me. I've seen Chukwudi in nothing.
He's in Peacemaker.
I've since seen him in a few other things, through his IMDb. But I hope that the MCU will think of this as opposed to hey, we have to cast a huge name in something. Let's just cast the right actors and the right people, the right directors. Let's cast people that are super talented and just let them cook, because he cooked in this movie.
He does. And if you would have told me before Guardians 1 that one of the most emotional arcs that you will have in all of the MCU will be a CGI raccoon, I would have laughed in your face. But this movie, the way that they tell Rocket's story, who's always been an entertaining character.
He's been a fan favorite.
And you've known that he's gone through some stuff since the very first, when he's got the gun pointed at Drax and they're yelling at each other in Guardians 1, that he's kind of traumatized. But the way that this movie uses his story, his origin story, as the emotional pull we talked about in our Ant-Man video, how there's not like a strong emotional that brings you into the story and makes Kang feel like very threatening. Whereas with Rocket's origin story and the way that the High Evolutionary is played, you get this sense of like urgency.
Mm-hmm.
And you get that sense of the heart that brings, because it's so easy with the Guardians, because there's so many laughing moments, to be like, we want to tell a seriousness. This is the third one. Are we going to kill somebody? And I love that James Gunn, one, he didn't kill anybody off before he left. So all of these actors have the potential to come back to Marvel if they get offered a movie. But also, we get that gut-wrenching, heartstrings pulled in a different, subverted way, because we're not expecting to see just the emotional toll that seeing like the torture of animals does to somebody. And it's not a way that we, like a lot of movies I think would have been afraid to show you as much as they show you that they do to Rocket Raccoon.
Yeah, for this movie to be a funny Guardians movie, and funny is probably not a fun and enjoyable film, it's pretty dark.
Yeah, this
like,
is one of the few
I haven't had a
take
chance.
kids to.
So I haven't had a chance to talk to my brother-in-law yet, Frank. His favorite series in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is Guardians, and I know that he was taking his son Friday to see it. And Levi is 9, and I know that he recently went to the SPCA and was like crying because of the animals there. So I'm certain. I can't wait to hear what his response was to this movie, but I think it's a good point of like juxtaposing the two of Ant-Man Quantumania versus this film, where Ant-Man, there weren't the stakes there. So I needed somebody to die so that it felt like, oh wow, we met Kang and this thing happened. I give so much more credit to James Gunn and this writing crew, because I think if you would have killed somebody, it almost devalues some of the other stuff. But it still has this incredible weight without needing that. Ant-Man needed those stakes to be raised because there wasn't that emotional equity that we were given to the audience. Here, we're given so much equity that the head fakes here, there, or everybody, is this where Drax is going to die? Oh my gosh, is Mantis going to die? Oh my gosh, is this where Nebula ends? Is Rocket going to die? Is Peter going to die? Oh, there's so many moments, and then we're triumphant. And maybe that's just the eternal optimist in me of getting the movie moment of, oh, they're happy. But I really think that it's just a credit to the writing. It really is a really well-written movie. And one of the first things I look at when I'm ranking these movies is the story. And this story just kept on giving, where obviously we watched the first 2 this week prior leading up to the movie, which is just a fun way to watch the movie in general. This is the first trilogy in the MCU, in my opinion, that feels like a full trilogy. We've got Ant-Man, Captain America, Iron Man, the Avengers, Spider-Man, and then Guardians of the Galaxy. Spider-Man has kind of somewhat of an end, but even in the way that it ends, it kind of pushes you forward. This movie feels like the end of a trilogy, the end of an era, and it's just really, really good. What do you think it rates in like the area of like other trilogies?
At the top.
Is it the best one?
It's the best one. It tells its character story the best. I think when I look at my overall rankings of all of the MCU, its average is higher than all the rest of them. Now, don't get me wrong, there are higher movies like Captain America Civil War for me is, way up there in my MCU ranking. But then, and so is Winter Soldier, but then the first one's like really far back. But the Guardians have been consistently right there, all grouped together for me with like overall rating, where they fit in my, overall MCU rating.
Yeah, I think pound for pound, like the Guardians slaps. Like, and if I'm rating the 3, I think 2 is probably the weakest, but it's still probably a top 15 MCU film.
Yep.
And they've made 35 movies now.
Yeah.
So if all 3 of the movies are in the top 12, the top 1/3 of the movies, I think that speaks to just a really cool vision.
Yeah, almost almost the three of them are in my top 10. So
Yeah. So something we haven't talked about that I did want to make sure we spoke a little bit of time to was the music, because obviously from the very get-go, the very first one, music is a huge part. Not only is it part of the movie just in like the storytelling, but it also is one of those things that just sets it apart from the rest of the MCU. From the very first moment where we get to meet Peter and his mother Meredith, she's giving him this tape. That movie ends with a dance battle and everyone coming together. The second movie starts with another great kind of flashback to the 80s and Mr. Blue Sky, and it pushes us forward with the characters until we get there. And in this movie, kind of starts a little bit differently. You know, you mentioned how you really loved how they started off with that focus on Rocket and then the music of Creep by Radiohead, that kind of acoustic play. What did you think of that?
Oh yeah, so you like listen to the lyrics of Creep, and I think it almost perfectly describes so many characters in the Guardians group of like, yes, they found each other, they became friends, then they became a team and a family, and they're on Nowhere now. But they still haven't dealt with their own like personal underlying like issues and their sense of like not belonging, especially Rocket, who has been like created to be the way that he is. He wasn't born
in
that way.
the first movie, they come together, but they really don't resolve their issues. They just decide like, oh, we're worth coming together.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where that ends. And then in the second movie, you get to see them be challenged and tested. Where like they're clearly a force to be reckoned with. They can defend the sovereign and do all these amazing things, but then they start to deal with some like fissures and fractures of Peter choosing his blood family versus the chosen family, and then you obviously have all the events of Endgame and Infinity War that kind of split them into different places. Now they have to deal with all that stuff that they never dealt with. They never dealt with it in the first movie. Yeah. They just said, you know, we're. It's kind of like real life. You know, you think of when you're dating a girlfriend or a boyfriend or making friends. You decide like, hey, this is worth my time to invest in. But then down the road, you still have to deal with the things that come up. And I thought the topic of music was interesting because the moment Creep starts playing, and I know the song so well. It's one of the first songs I learned how to play on guitar. Of the I Don't Belong Here. I don't belong here. I think every one of those characters has felt, especially in this movie, like, I don't belong here. I don't belong in this group. And then the music continues to go out throughout the whole movie. The soundtrack, it really speaks to more of like the grunge of the early 90s, but really it started in the mid 80s. And when you look up like grunge and what is grunge music, one of the first hits on Google is that it speaks to dark trauma or more mature content. And I would say that this movie speaks to more mature content and dark trauma the way that grunge music does. So I think it's really cool that the music sets the tone in the beginning, but then it just continues to drive that tone while still being significant. It was the next evolution after the music that we heard from Guardians 1 and Guardians 2 in the 80s. It's this very natural evolution that it just fits really well and sets the tone throughout the rest of the movie.
And I then they hop into Heart, Crazy on You. He's flying through space. It's awesome. The guitar riff, as he's coming in is so cool. And I love how it progresses. My only knock musically, and I get it. James Gunn does such a good job of choosing not only songs that the lyrics fit, but also like the story behind the songs and the albums fit in with the theme that he's trying to portray in the particular scene. And he uses No Sleep Till Brooklyn. I've just heard it so many times in movies and recently because I've been listening to the Mario soundtrack with my son repeatedly that I was like, okay, like this has just been done a lot, like the song. But I get the reason why this the last hoorah on the last show. I get the point of it, and that's the scene that he uses it in. The fight scene, the hallway fight scene, is one of the best like
top
fight scenes
top
you'll
three,
ever see.
top four I've ever seen in the entire
MCU, in a movie, anywhere. They do the one shot, which has been done a lot in movies lately. We get Everybody Can Do It, but it was really well done in this instance, and it's so fun. And then the last song, just I hadn't really listened to it before. I know the song was popular, like we're in like high school ish time, but and you knew more about like lyrically this song, but I've listened to it a few times since, and it's just such like a good closing song for their story. I felt like. What were you thinking?
The dog days are over.
Yeah,
and I think it's this speaks to some of the challenges that I had with the movie. One of the biggest things I shared with you when we left was the very end of the movie when they play The Dog Days Are Over. They're kind of going between a couple of places as you wrap up the ending. You know, you've got people on Nowhere, people here, people there. Peter on Terra, on Earth 616, visiting his grandfather, reuniting for the first time after all those years, everything that he's been through. He's finally going to reunite with them. And we're seeing these different moments, and people are kind of finding some of those, like, we're kind of having those, like, resolving actions. We're settling into the end of the story. And I thought that there was a really good chance for the way that I just know the song where the Dog Days Are Over, where the drums are do, for them to stop right as Peter meets his grandfather, and they get to have this cathartic moment. Because I did not cry in this movie, but I definitely had like a lump in my throat in several parts. It was a very emotional movie, so I just needed that catharsis. I had a lot of catharsis through laughter, where it was so well timed and well placed, great pacing, great acting. I give lots of credit to that. But the emotional, I just wanted to be able to cry. I wanted that moment to be able to see his grandfather again, his grandfather cry. And then instead of it being that moment, they cut back to Nowhere, and they, happiness! And everyone's are dancing, having a good time. And I was like, in the moment, I felt robbed of the catharsis. However, I've since had time to think about it, and it's not, this movie is not Peter's story. The first one is much more Peter's story. The second one is a lot of Peter's story. But as we learned, this movie is not about Peter. It's about Rocket. But it's also about all of the Guardians. So we got enough information about him going home. And honestly, it's possibly more of a like cathartic moment to cut to Nebula dancing in the sea of children. Like, literally, the last movie that we saw Nebula in was Endgame, and she's struggling to play chess with Tony Stark. You know, she's like, no, I won. I don't know. No. What do I get? Like, she's gone through such a ride, and that emotion itself, and, you know, the part just before that where Nebula is saying to Drax, you're not a destroyer. You're a dad.
Oh, yeah, that like, slapped.
Man, that hit me. I was like, oh, wow. So to cut to Nebula and Drax on Nowhere with these kids just dancing and, like, thinking of how far those two have come, that is way more catharsis than what I would have gotten if I would have had it my way. And, again, credit to the MCU, to James Gunn, for I thought I knew what I wanted going into that, and like the rewatchability and just the incredible level of detail and thought put into it, it's just really fun. And I think it kind of launches you into a new green pasture where someone else could come in and do a Guardians movie, and it doesn't have to be what James Gunn had it. It can be a new thing with new characters or a new slate, a new cast, and it can still be its own thing. I think it's just a testament to like what inspired filmmaking can be.
I think in a way it's just beautiful to see all the storylines, all the growth through all the movies and time we've spent with these characters in Guardians feels like it pays off. It's not like a cheap, the biggest criticism of Thor has been that like we see character growth and then they revert him right back to like he's got to go find himself again. We see character growth, we see all these things, and then it's like we take them and just let's forget about what we did the last movie and bring them back to this place for something. With this, it feels like every one of their movies you watch, you feel like they're building on top of the character all the way till the end of their storyline, and it makes sense. You feel rewarded for having stuck with these characters for as long as we've had them on screen, and you feel like satisfied as a consumer because it's like all those changes, the choices they make at the end of the movie make sense because we've seen them grow so much, and they don't do like a drastic revert back to, i.e. like Game of Thrones style, where you have these characters with 9 seasons of growth, and then all of a sudden they're doing stuff that they were doing in the first season. So it was very cool to me to see the writing, the consistency. I think had they kept James Gunn fired, we don't get this style of follow through from another writer.
Yep. Yeah, and that makes me think of the 2 other things I didn't like about the movie, and you'll see a recurring theme here. I had 3 things I didn't like about the movie. The other thing I didn't like about the movie was towards the end when they're all deciding they're going to leave and they're going to do this, and Groot says, "I love you guys." I was like, that just felt really odd. I remember watching the first one, like, "We are Groot." I was like, that's kind of cool, but like it just felt cheesy knowing in the second one he didn't. Did you see the tweet that James Gunn did today?
No.
I did not even think about this, but James Gunn confirmed this. Someone tweeted a theory out to him, and James Gunn confirmed that this is true. Groot did not say, "I love you guys." He says, "I am Groot." But now that all the group is whole, everybody is whole, we have now, as the audience, been welcomed in to the group, and we can now understand him the same way that the others can understand him.
I'd seen a few videos where like Eric Voss talked about it and Screen Crush, where they were like they theorized that that's what had happened, and so I was like, okay, if that's the way they're going with it, I get it.
James Gunn,
cool.
James Gunn
cool to
tweeted
hear him
today,
confirm it.
100% that is confirmed. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, one of my big complaints was, and he tweeted about this too, but like Peter doesn't have any of his equipment. Like, where's your mask? You're in space again. Like, and he's like, oh, he forgot that on in his desk at nowhere because he was like in a rush to leave. But it's like, okay, that's a little convenient, like
a little bit.
Thought, just because he had a mask in Infinity War, so like he clearly has a new mask after Ego destroyed his mask.
Well, so the other thing I didn't like was some of the usage of Adam Warlock. I loved the way he shows up. Like when he shows up, I was like, and again, when we watch these movies, we only watch the trailer one time.
Yeah, I watched the very first trailer.
I don't watch. I avoid it like the plague. I want to enjoy the movie. I don't want to dissect it 10,000 times before I see it. I want, when we have the discussion in the minivan on the way home, that's the first time I'm talking about it. So I knew that Adam Warlock was going to be in this movie. I thought he was the main protagonist or antagonist.
Like villains,
I thought he was going to be the villain of the movie. So I was really surprised by all of this. It was a really great surprise for me. I know there's a lot of people that said they had watched multiple trailers, like, oh, they knew it was going to be a really deep, dark rocket story. I didn't, because I live under a rock during these times. But the usage of Adam Warlock, because I'm very familiar with the comics and who he is, they've really used a lot of his storylines on Vision. Adam Warlock's a huge character in the comic books. Literally the bolt that he has in his head, that's supposed to be the Mind Stone like Vision has. So lots of those storylines were taken from him. And in the comic books, he actually wields the Infinity Gauntlet, and he can kind of be a good guy and a bad guy depending on which issues he's in. But then I saw an interview with James Gunn where he talked about that was one of the most difficult things to incorporate. He knew, he's like, I set him up. I wanted to write him in. I set it up perfectly with Sovereign and Aisha, so I knew it was always going to come. But then this movie took a little bit different shape, and I had it here, and so I knew I wanted to tease it and bring it along, but making sure that it felt cohesive was really difficult for him. But he also said, when you watch Civil War, it's not Spider-Man's movie, but Spider-Man is introduced. So he has said, I have set up Adam Warlock now to be, he's introduced, now he can go do his own movie. And when he said that, all of a sudden it hit me. I was like, yeah, I wasn't mad at Spider-Man in Civil War. And especially in Adam Warlock's case, he was just born. Like, he's an infant. He's now lost his mother with Aisha being dead. Now he's been shaped by the Guardians. He can now go be his own thing and do his own thing. So what I thought was a problem, once I hear some explanation about it, I'm like, yeah, that actually makes more sense, and I'm cool with that.
Yeah, I think if they give us an Adam Warlock movie and he's still just like an idiot, it would be kind of annoying. But I think if they're like, oh, he's been with Rocket this whole time. He's taught him, and then now, because he even says like after he cooks that guy, when she's like, show him what we can do, and then he like kills him. He's like, oh, that didn't feel good to like murder somebody. Like that doesn't feel right. And so he is an infant. It is like a little bit on the nose for like another like male, like very strong male character to be introduced, and he's just like a complete idiot.
Yep.
Of like the criticism we've seen of the MCU lately, because it's like you get like America Chavez and she's just like trying to be like super likable, and you get these other characters, and then it's like, oh, here's Adam Warlock, he's just this dummy, like this golden dummy that just like doesn't know what he's doing. So that's kind of an annoyance, but no, I think that's a valid criticism, especially if you're a big Adam Warlock fan. I could see, I don't know. I mean, I know like loosely who he is, but I couldn't have told you much about him before the Guardians movies.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I'm very familiar with Adam Warlock. I thought it was a really clever way to introduce him, because like the Sovereign, they're not actually a comic book people at all. That's a totally
he made
unique
those up.
James Gunn thing. So it works really well. So I think that kind of, I don't really have we don't need to like go into all the details of the movie. I think we both liked it.
My last complaint before we move on is that Gamora calls and tells them where they are. And I'm like, you can't keep using that like way to get because he does that in Guardians 1, he has Drax call, and then in Guardians 2 he has he has the Taserface call the Sovereign and tell them where they're at. And I'm like, you can't just keep calling the bad guy.
So the question is that like lazy writing where it's convenient, or is that like hey, we're gonna make a trope in our because I had the same thing. There's a couple of things here, like especially with like the mask. I'm like, oh, that is lazy to me. But then I'm like, well, maybe it's just part of the series. Is it's meant to feel like this, where Back to the Future is an amazing trilogy, but like the three movies are basically the same movie just hashed out, and they're like, let's just do it in the future and in the past, and let's go to the Western and do it all again. But it's not. It's campy, but you don't knock it for that. So is that kind of the same thing here, where James Gunn just kind of created his own style?
I mean, it could be, but I feel like he could have given us their like way of finding them just in a slightly different version. He'd be like, oh, we put a tracker on your... I mean, which Yondu had done that in the last one, so I guess I could have complained about that. But just a slightly different version, because it's like, all right, James, like you can just... Because you can use some stuff. It's almost like when we talked about... John Wick, and you talked about the Warriors, and then like taking the whole thing. Like you can take some pieces, and it's like, okay, this is cool because this is how you did it before, and now you're giving us that same like twist on it. That's how you do it. But with that, it was just like that just seemed like a really convenient way to write them into finding you when you could have just done it any other. You could have just been like, oh, the High Evolutionary sent Adam Warlock and War Pig at the same time, and Adam Warlock just happens to kill War Pig.
Yep.
Because he's an idiot, but.
War Pig,
which is an awesome name. It's my
and it looked cool.
Song.
This movie just looked cool. It felt cool. I've been really into collecting screen printed posters. I think I'm gonna get one for this movie just because there's gonna be some cool stuff. So let's talk and pivot away from this movie specifically and kind of the implication for the MCU. We know from our conversation about Iron Man and just moving away from the story, there's obviously things that we know about like contracts and issues. We know that the MCU has been meeting mixed reviews, and part of that I think is its own problem. I think another part of that is the entire entertainment industry as a whole was struggling with COVID. After Endgame, the MCU has not had the same identity. Part of that is they haven't had the same identity of a big bad. For years, we were marching towards Thanos and the battle for the Infinity Stones, and it was very clear. Literally, that started with Guardians Volume 1. So all those movies, we knew there was something looming, even in stories that didn't interact with that. Now you have a case where you've had some movies. Some people have not liked them. Some people have felt their quality is lower. Whatever your personal opinion is, I think we can all agree that there's been just something afoot with Marvel. And they've really put a lot of their eggs in their basket on Kang being this big bad villain. And I know there's a lot of people out there that thought that Ant-Man Quantumania 3 sucked, that they thought it was a terrible movie. It's performed as bad as a Marvel movie's ever done. So there are people that don't have a lot of confidence. And you add in the legal trouble with the domestic assault charges for Jonathan Williams and all the Jonathan Majors and all the stuff there. What do you think about this movie in that kind of vacuum? James Gunn was supposed to be leading the cosmic wing of the MCU. Then his own allegations and controversy happens. He's now being hired to be the new Kevin Feige at DC. He's going to leave and go to the competition. Is this like a huge loss for the MCU? Is this a reminder of what they can do? Is he going to go to DC and do this, or what? What do you kind of think?
So I think it is a big loss for them. I think they fumbled that bag a little bit when they fired him, and they lost that like in the cosmic producer. So he essentially would have been like Kevin Feige, but over the space. So that way Kevin Feige isn't so stretched thin.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're losing a big player because he has shown that he has a real respect for the original source medium.
Yep.
And that all of his movies, I mean, a lot of the MCU movies are full of Easter eggs, but all of his have so many tie-ins to the comics and the way that he pays respect for characters in a way that I'm really looking forward to see how he fleshes out DC. But I think that Marvel's losing a guy who you see him choose these like artsy directors for different projects, and it really makes you wonder of like, are they choosing the right person that like will give this the reverence that it needs, or are they choosing somebody because they're the popular name at the moment, i.e. like the director of Eternals, Chloe Zhao.
Yeah, Chloe Zhao.
Who I don't know if she is into or not into comics. I know she was a solid director, but like I think there's more like that passion, that vision that he had. And Feige's talked about finding directors with that vision. We talked about it a few weeks ago, going forward, because you need more than just like visual talent. You have to be able to encompass the original fan set of these characters that have been paying for merchandise and comics for all these years, and bring in the movie fans and new audience at the same time. And James Gunn's style was kind of a perfect blend for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he makes a perfect comic book movie. I'm more excited after seeing this to see what he will do with like a Batman and a Superman. We haven't ever gotten a really good Superman movie, in my opinion. So it would be really cool to see him. The new Rockstar has really paid a lot of attention to how James Gunn has called his first phase at DC Gods and Monsters, and how if you look at the Guardians movies, it really is a microcosm of gods and monsters, and the gods losing and the monsters winning, and kind of what that looks like. So I'm more excited about that. That said, and again, maybe this is my eternal optimism, I also think that like Guardians and James Gunn is kind of like that perfect marriage where like they just fit so well together because it's so weird and so obscure. I liked Suicide Squad, both of them, but they're okay. Yeah. They weren't great, and maybe that's because he wasn't in charge. He wasn't able to do everything he wanted to do. He was limited. We'll see. But I still think that there's a lot of really great filmmakers out there. It's up to the MCU and Kevin Feige to let them cook,
like they did with the Russos.
Yep, exactly. Let the Russos do their things. There are parts of Multiverse of Madness that are just fantastic because it said, let Sam Raimi do his thing. But we also found out later that you sent this text to me the other day that the writers didn't get to watch WandaVision before they wrote the movie. And they didn't edit it. And WandaVision is one of the best things that have ever come out of the MCU. As far as like Disney Plus, I think it's probably the best thing
Disney Plus show
that's come out of Disney Plus for those series. That and Loki are, to me, clearly the best things. But for you to not have that seems like such a monumental failure.
Maybe that's why What's-Her-Face got fired.
Maybe
she was over that so, one particular thing.
There is another, like, I don't have a good streaming suggestion for you this week, but there's lots of good information for you to check out. There's a good podcast called The Big Picture, and in it this week they did their episode on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. and their special guest actually wrote a 4-year-long project, a book about the MCU and what that means for the industry of film and what that's done. And she actually talks about her firing and got a lot of news and press, and basically boiled it down to this. One reason that she got fired was she was producing another movie for Amazon, and they were like, "You're not going to be producing a movie for a competitor and doing that." But also because she really put her hat on a lot of the VFX and a lot of these like smaller character stories. She really wanted to see some of these underrepresented characters show up, and those are like, for example, like, hey, we're really going to push a show like Echo, which was a sub-character from Hawkeye, a sub-character of a sub-character series.
It's like the
you and I have talked we've talked a lot about, like, hey, I'm not really sure I want to see Riri Williams because I like Iron Man. Like, I don't need to see Iron Lad or Iron Heart. I like Iron Man. I like the main characters. And there's plenty of characters to choose from, but she said that was a big issue. Now that she did say there's been a big like settlement and a big NDA, so we're not going to hear the tell-all or anything like that. But she's doing fine. She's not going to be struggling. But she did mention a lot of how the MCU brand has been burned in a very unique way that post-Endgame has been challenging. Endgame is kind of like the pinnacle of so much, and because of that they realize, like, scrambling, we have to do all these different things. Obviously COVID hits at a very inopportune time when they're launching all this Disney Plus content, so movies aren't necessarily made the way they want to be made, shows aren't being made the way they want to be made, and now we're starting to get back to like movies that are going to be starting to be made as the way they're intended. So I want to give Kevin Feige and Marvel some credit that they figured out some of their happenstances. But I also know that they put a lot on Kang. And if Jonathan Majors gets recast, I'm having a hard time imagining it being successful, just from like, even not just like the movies being good, but just this is a struggle that the MCU hasn't dealt with before.
Yeah.
They've had the issue with Scarlett Johansson and like releasing that movie out on Disney Plus, and the lawsuit, all that. They've had James Gunn's issues, but all those things kind of were able to be resolved. This one is like a totally different monster.
Well, I think one of the big keys is they've decided, they've come out and said they're scaling back.
Yep.
So like that Echo show, we'll probably never see that.
Oh man.
They realize that like there's only so much they can keep their hands on and keep it cohesive. And I think that, like you talked about with WandaVision, that's a big oversight. Like that's something that you can't tell a movie and then put a version of Wanda in there that's not where you left her off after the show if you want us to see your show as important and see your movies as important. And so when you're in charge of so many different projects and so many different types of things, you can't have your hands on everything at once. Humans can only do so much at one time. No matter how talented they are, they can only spread their wings so far. I do agree, scaling back, that's going to put way less pressure on their relationships with these visual effects studios. I think it's going to bring up the overall quality of the movies, and they're going to be able to focus more on stories that people actually really care about. I think some of those other side characters, if they want to do like animated shows for the people that are just really into Echo, like the 12 people that really want to watch that show, they can watch the animated version or something like that, where it's much less of a production cost, much less risk adverse ways to deliver some of those stories, but you still speak to stories that people really want to see. I think that they tried to say, well, maybe we're going to do like the female Avengers, or maybe we're going to do the young Avengers, and I think recently they've realized we're getting way too far out there. We got to rein a lot of this back in. With Majors, if they do recast him, you've sent me this, I've seen it a few times, get the guy that played the High Evolutionary. If we have to get somebody else, we can say he's a variant of Kang to some degree.
Gosh, I've seen that on Twitter so much.
And I think he acted phenomenally. I'd be on board to see what my only worry would be he portrayed like narcissistic, super egotistical version very well, but like Jonathan Majors had shown us that he could portray a lot of different subtleties this guy's a great actor. I'm sure he could, but like I haven't seen it, so
Yeah.
that would be my only worry.
No, I am obviously on the side of justice. Whatever needs to happen to Jonathan Majors needs to happen there. But from the story perspective, we all agree that that is the way it should happen. But from the story, in a separate, not as important line, I just have a hard time imagining that someone else can do what he has done already in just a few short roles in Loki and Ant-Man and just some of the areas that we've already seen. We know he's got the chops to do so many different things, and I think that the MCU's laid more on him than they did on Iron Man or Josh Brolin or Chris Evans. As an actor, they've really said, we're going to ride this wave. And I think that they found something really unique in that this person can start popping up all across different movies and shows, and it can be impactful, as opposed to like, hey, what can we do with a cameo of this other person? The villain can just show up, and it's still meaningful and insightful. It kind of reminds me of when I was watching The Walking Dead. The first season, oh my gosh, zombies. Second season, zombies everywhere, and we're on a farm. And then the third season, oh, zombies everywhere, and we're in a prison. And then the fourth season, oh, zombies everywhere, we're in a neighborhood. Like, every season, I got a little, but by the time I got to the end of the third season, I was kind of fatigued with the idea.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, okay, we found our group. Another group's going to attack us. We're going to kill that group. Okay. Well, our group gets a little bit bigger. There's another big group. We're going to kill them. Like, it just kind of became so regurgitated that I think the line of storytelling for Kang is very interesting. It's not just, oh, who's the next big bad Thanos that wants to destroy half the universe? This story actually makes sense. I like that. Whereas, like, if you look at some of the crap that's come off of Disney Plus, and I'm using that as an example because it's very clearly what I think is kind of the worst of it. Like She-Hulk, Miss Marvel, Moon Knight. Those all have good moments in there, but they're not good. Then you have some things like Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Hawkeye, which are fine. I actually like a lot of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It makes a lot of sense. But there's some parts where it feels really rushed. But in like Loki, WandaVision, What If, which isn't canon, but What If is really good. Those are the things I think they should have on Disney Plus. And when I look at the movies, like, I think Shang-Chi's a really good movie. I liked that movie.
I enjoyed it.
I think Eternals and Black Widow are two of the worst movies, period, in the entire...
They're in the back end for me.
Like, I think Black Widow is probably my worst movie on my list.
And Eternals is mine.
So very good. We're on the same page. But it's just kind of a weird thing where juxtaposed with, like, the weird timing of COVID and Endgame, you also have the loss of cast of Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, Scarlett Johansson, Josh Brolin,
Chadwick
Boseman died. There's a lot that happened that they're still reeling. I mean, there's already rumors that Brie Larson wants to be done as Captain Marvel because she's got so much bad press and the fans hate her. So she's like, I don't want to do this anymore. So they're going to lose her. Like, it just seems really odd. Like, they've got to figure out a way to stabilize that ship. So I guess my last question as we kind of end this is, now that Peter Quill is on Earth, when are we going to get a heist movie with him and Scott Lang?
Oh man, that would be so fun. If Kevin Feige knows what's good for him, that'll be what's pushed out there next. Oh,
it's just like a buddy comedy.
Oh, that would be so funny.
It's just The Good Guys, again with Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling, but it's Scott Lang and Peter Quill.
Oh, that would be an epic movie.
Who do you think he was talking about in that post-credit scene? He's like, he mows the yard. Who do you think he's talking about?
I did see a funny theory where it's like that's like his half brother, like he'd never met him before or whatever. Like it's like Ego had impregnated some other lady.
Oh man!
And he like meets him, and it's like his other. He looks just like him.
That would be interesting. Comment below in who you think he's talking about. I've intentionally stayed away from some of the material about who that is. But I was like, they've got to be alluding to something or someone that we are familiar with.
The 6-episode arc, like you talked about, Peter Quill doing lawn service for a senior community.
Oh, that would be great. But it'd be such a hilarious troll of, it's just videos of
They could
Peter
do like a web
Quill
series.
just riding on a zero-turn lawnmower, and you just watch him for 40 minutes mow grass.
He's like,
There's no.
he's like,
It's just the audio of just. But then there's like a soundtrack to it.
Oh man,
That would be sick.
it'd be epic. So, what do you rank? What do you rate this movie?
Okay, so I have to refer to another tweet that I screen grabbed because I just thought that it was perfect. This movie is just giant group family therapy. It is a session with a big release of trauma, and it's got crying and laughing, and it's very simply great. Like the sequence made me tear up a little bit at the very end of them dancing, because that's how it all started, was music and dancing. I've always said that music is like a time capsule. You can hear a song and you remember where you were when you heard it. You hear a song from a funeral, and that song is now a funeral song. You hear a song with your friends, and it is that moment. You can smell it, you can taste it, you can feel it. And this movie felt like a perfect song. What I got here is this. This is from the Moonlit Warrior on Twitter. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is James Gunn at the peak of his powers. It's heartfelt, it's dark, it's enthralling and sincere. It's a transcendent experience that will cause your emotions to move and your tears to flow. This movie is a reminder of what the MCU can accomplish when they try. For me, this is a 9.5 out of 10. And the only reason I'm not giving it the 0.5 more is because it's not Endgame or Infinity War.
Wow, I did not expect a 9.5. I like it.
I seriously believe that there are 3 movies in the MCU that are better than this. This sits squarely at number 4 all time in the pantheon of MCU movies.
So I'm going to do my rating, and then I want to ask you where this rates overall in the trilogy. For me, I left the theater thinking that this was going to be behind the first Guardians. The more I've thought about it, the more things I've watched, this to me rates as the highest Guardians movie overall in my MCU ranking. And I think that when you look at it, what all it is as a whole and as an individual movie, I give it a 9. I think that it has everything that you want from a cinematic experience, and it has everything you want from a trilogy conclusion, and it's in my top 10 firmly, along with Guardians 1, and Guardians 2 is at 11. Mm-hmm. So overall, that's why it sits at the top of my trilogies as well. Yep. For you, where does it sit in the trilogy order?
So trilogy order, I think that, again, so my top 3 movies in the MCU are Endgame, Infinity War, Spider-Man No Way Home, and then this film.
Okay.
I think what Spider-Man No Way Home did for like all of the Spider-Man franchises that we've been alive, of Spider-Man with Sam Raimi and The Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, they were so impeccably able to take all these things that they had no control over and make a story that was powerful and moving. It was a great movie. We'll talk about it at some point. I'm certain of it. Endgame and Infinity War really could effectively be one long movie, and we'd love it every time. This movie is the culmination of a trilogy that was all in James Gunn's mind and executed beautifully by the actors, by the companies that produced him. The MCU deserves a lot of credit for being ambitious. As much as they failed with like Hawkeye and the things we just joked about, they took a risk on Guardians way back when. That could have been a commercial failure, and they were like, oh, we're not going to do it. But they did take a risk, and when you take risks, you learn to take more risks. So I hope they continue to take risks. I hope they just are luckier and they do those things better, because the risk they took on Guardians was not let's do it poorly. It was people might not connect with this, but we are going to do it so well that they will. Whereas in the past what they've done is, I don't know if they're going to connect with this, but let's just do it. Let's just rush it. Let's get it out. We got to get it out. We got to get it out. So the quality suffers. So I think as far as like trilogies go, like you said, this is pound for pound. These movies hit a lot harder. The biggest problems I have with other trilogies is like Ant-Man 3 doesn't feel like an Ant-Man movie, and it's not really a conclusion to the Ant-Man series. Iron Man 3 is a bad movie. It's got a lot of good popcorn value, and again, when I say a bad movie, it's not like it sucks, no one can ever watch it, but it's not in the top half of Marvel movies. It's much closer to Black Widow and Eternals than most people would like to admit, as far as like quality and value wise. And like Civil War, which is a great Captain America movie, is really more of a conclusion of like of Iron Man and Captain America's friendship leading up to Infinity War. It doesn't really leave me satisfied with the story. So Guardians 1, 2, and 3 together, we watched them within like 48 hours of each other. That slaps. Like, that was fun. Like, it felt like watching a 9-episode season of something. Everything is cohesive. It all fits. The very opening sequence of Guardians 1, where Meredith dies of cancer, it hits, and it hurts so much more knowing that Ego did that to her.
Yeah.
Like, that hurts. My mother-in-law has breast cancer, so knowing, like, something like that, it could happen. Like, that, it hurts differently. Seeing the examples of, like, a family coming together. Yondu talking about he wasn't your he was your father, but he wasn't your daddy. Mm-hmm. There's so many lines with the whole series that just hit. I'm anticipating this Volume 3, having so much rewatchability because there were so many lines where I felt like I was kind of at church. Or like, So
keep preaching.
I loved the movie. I think that I would love to say that there's something better trilogy-wise out there, but there's not. There just isn't. And beyond the MCU, I start to think, what other comic book trilogy or superhero trilogy compares? And the only other thing I can think that speaks to this is when you start getting into like The Dark Knight with Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises. I think that, and then you start to think of like, all right, well, if it's like a top 2 or 3 comic book or superhero genre trilogy, how does it rank amongst like all-time trilogies? You know, Bourne Ultimatum, Star Wars, Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings. Like, I think that this Guardians of the Galaxy will age so well that in years in the future, we can look at it and say, like, this might be like a top 10 trilogy of like all time.
Yeah, it's hard to keep for anything to keep 3 movies that are as consistent as these Guardians movies.
And with that, it's not like it's like cookie cutter. Like, let's just do the same thing over
yeah,
again.
but it's just like there's so many times the first movie is a surprise and people love it, and then the second one just stinks, and they've got just enough money to make the third one, and it just is there.
Shout out to influencer I follow on Instagram, Steelbook Man. He collects Steelbook Blu-ray DVDs. His favorite Steelbook that he owns is Guardians Volume 1. And he talked about in his short that he posted this past week, he loves Star Wars, but he's so Star Wars fatigued. This movie is a reminder to him of, I don't want to see Star Wars in space. I want to see the Guardians in space. I want to see these people explore this. And I think there's a lot of opportunity. I'm not saying they should do this because they're going to focus, but like, it would be so cool to see a Disney Plus show where like Mantis goes off on her own and just is off in the galaxy doing different things and interacting with different people. That's something that I would be more interested in seeing than like an Echo show. And like Mantis is a female. She has like representation for different types of like nationalities and demographics, whereas like Echo is like just another Daredevil. Like, let me see something unique. And I think there's opportunity there. I just think this is a great series. It's a great movie. Do you have any other closing thoughts to say about it?
Well, I think the greatness of this trilogy inspired us to look forward to another all-time trilogy.
Yes.
A fan favorite, one of many people's favorite movie trilogies of all time, and that is Back to the Future.
Back to the Future, man. I love it.
So next week we're gonna break down the trilogy Back to the Future. We're We're going to talk about its themes. We're going to talk about the things that we love about the movies, some of the things that we wish they would have changed a little bit. But we want you guys to be able to enjoy that conversation, to come along with us on this road trip. And so we want you guys to watch those movies. That's our streaming recommendation this week is to find Back to the Future. It's been out for a long time. You can rent it relatively cheaply anywhere, I'm sure.
Or you can probably watch it on TBS.
Yeah,
it'll
be somewhere. So
somewhere.
You could probably find it on your DirecTV on demand. But if not, if you've never seen it, watch it. A lot of people probably have it somewhere. Dust off that old DVD player, pop it in.
I have the Blu-ray set of all three.
I have seen.
I
all
don't
three of
know
them,
if
but
I have a
don't know
Blu-ray
them.
player though.
Your Xbox.
Okay, my X.
Yeah, that's the great thing about the Xbox and the PlayStations. If you have those, if your kids have those, they are Blu-ray players. You can use them. So we just blacked out like a youngin in college, but we're back. So
No, it's the continuous power supply gives it constant power, but the camera has a setting where it's just mirroring the display. The mirror, if it doesn't get touched every 30 minutes, it turns off. So
just like my wife. No, I'm just kidding.
if it doesn't get touched every 30 minutes, it turns off. Yeah, so that's the show. Next week we're gonna talk about Back to the Future. As a reminder, we're trying to do things differently every single week. This week we got the purple microphones. We're hanging out in the minivan. We appreciate you showing up with us in the minivan. Don't forget, we're doing our promotion. Movie on the Mini. We are on the race to 100 subscribers. We're nearly halfway there. Go click the notifications and subscribe button on YouTube. And those first 100 subscribers are going to be entered into a drawing to win a $25 Fandango gift card. That's free movie tickets for you to go see a movie of your choosing, totally on the Mini. All you got to do is subscribe to our channel, subscribe, all that bull jar of jargon. You can follow me on Twitter if you want, at Minivan Brett. What's your handle on Twitter?
Oh, I'm gonna have to pull that one up.
No, I'm at Minivan Brett. That's how you know I'm serious. I'm for real about this.
Let's see. I changed my Twitter name, but let's see what I. Here we go.
I used to be at the Brett Gray. Now I'm just at Minivan Brett.
Ooh. I am at Nick Wiggum, so it's super easy.
Easy.
My Twitter handle though is Nick Minivan Movie Club.
Yeah.
So
Connect with us on social media. Let us know what you thought about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Let us know what you're excited about looking forward. And we'll see you down the road.
peace.
Cheers.